Welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is The American Revolution, Part 1. Let's get into it. So we're going to talk about 5 terms that as you do more reading, as you begin a process of learning more about the American Revolution, you recognize that these terms are helpful for understanding the many complexities of the process. So, first term, salutary neglect. So there's a couple different ways that this can be defined. Broadly, middle part of the 1600s, England passes a series of laws called the Navigation Acts. There was a big economic policy in the 17th century called mercantilism, which is basically capitalism controlled kind of by the state. And the Navigation Acts were designed as kind of ways of enforcing this process, collecting the taxes, being able to create a favorable balance of trade for England, this kind of stuff. However, it's really difficult to collect taxes if you're a government in the middle part of the 1600s. It just is. So England, of course, passes these laws and is able to enforce this to a point, but to a certain extent, they can't. And so as a result, they're kind of neglecting things. They're sort of kindly choosing not to enforce. And that process of salutary neglect is going to be around for about a century or so. All right. And it's what's going to change when the 7 Years' War comes to a close and England is in great debt as a result of this conflict. All right. That brings us to our second point, the 7 Years' War. So the 7 Years' War is looked at as the first truly global war. It's a war that in North America is going to involve a number of players, primarily of which will be England, the colonies, certainly, France and their colony, right, New France, Native American communities, and certainly First Nations peoples are going to be a part of this as well. But again, it's a truly global war, so it's going to involve conflict in India, it's going to involve conflict in Cuba, it's going to involve conflict all over. In North America, the English felt that there was sort of French incursion into the British colonial space. And so you're going to see the deployment of troops after William Pitt becomes the prime minister. You're going to see a much larger military commitment. This would be manifested in places like Quebec, which they lay siege to in 1759. The war comes to an end, and there is the British win. There's the Peace of Paris in 1763, and a number of the ending periods of this conflict kind of set the stage for the American Revolution. That brings us to our third point, which is the Sons of Liberty. So the Sons of Liberty were an organization that they get created in the 1760s. This is a group that is engaging in protests against British taxation and authority in the run-up to the American Revolution. There was also the Daughters of Liberty, and these groups of people are existing at a time, again, of rising political tension in opposition to British taxation and authority in the aftermath of the era of the 7 Years' War. Right after the 7 Years' War is over, salutary neglect is ended. Colonists are expected as a part of the empire to be able to shoulder part of the burden of empire. And colonists begin, some of them, because there will be loyalists throughout, colonists will begin to make political arguments, sort of referencing or connecting to the English Constitution, that they feel that their representation and their rights as English people are being denied. And so the Sons of Liberty and others are going to engage in some protests. Now, the Sons of Liberty are noted for some of the violence when it comes to these protests. But again, they're good to be sort of noting. All right, this brings us to our fourth point, which is the Stamp Act. Now, the Stamp Act was one of these laws that was passed in England, and it was designed in the 1760s to put a stamp on printed goods in the colonies. Now, again, the revenue here was designed to help pay the burden of empire. And The feeling in England was that this had existed already in England for quite a while, so this was relatively nominal. There was past precedence for this. This would make sense. However, public opposition to the Stamp Act in the British North American colonies was fairly sizable. Because again, if politics is perception, if politics is optics, you're putting a public stamp on something. You're selling a good in public. You're forcing folks to take a position in public on whether they like something, and opposition grew. And this would grow throughout the 1760s into the early 1770s, typifying with examples like our fifth point, the Boston Tea Party, where the favorable trade to support the East India Company leads to an action where their tea is ripped up and thrown into Boston Harbor and destroyed. Again, one of these final points of political outbursts and opposition in the era before the American Revolution. Thank you.